Hi folks, so this is the longest I've gone posting about a new moon after the new moon occurs. I usually post videos about a new moon or full moon before the new moon or full moon, but with new moon sometimes I like to do it after the new moon, but this is the longest it's been. I did try and do a video yesterday, and as some of you have probably been noticing, I've been having some trouble with the YouTube app on my phone, but I spent half an hour recording a video yesterday and it just went into the ether, and so I am giving it a shot again, but it did force me to do some research on my phone, and it, I think had a positive outcome. The new moon was in my leisure sector, so somewhere it was interesting and funny to me that I was not able to really work in some ways and had to do a certain amount of cleanup and put my feet up a little bit, which was nice. So here I am, and we're doing this new moon in Sagittarius video. The new moon occurred yesterday on November the 26th at 7:05 a.m. Pacific time. And really, the moon is still in Sagittarius right now, and we're very much in the shadow of this new moon. New moons bring subtle but unmistakable things related to the sector of the chart, the house that the sign in which the new moon occurs sits in. Let me say that again in a way that is easier to understand. The new moon in Sagittarius yesterday at 7:05 a.m. Pacific time will typically bring within 48 hours subtle and unmistakable things, offers, opportunities, something from the outside pertaining to the house or the part of the chart where the sign of Sagittarius sits in your chart. But if you feel like I don't know where Sagittarius sits in my chart and I don't have my chart, don't despair. The bulk of the narrative, this video is done assuming this video is not personalized. So bear with me for a few minutes and we'll dive into what it is that I really want to say about this video and how it fills how this new moon contributes to the general narrative of the time. Energy from a new moon is gradually going to build up, and it's going to increase as we get towards the full moon in the middle of December, December 11th, I think, and then of course start to peter down until we get to the next new moon. The other thing about new moons, of course, it's one of my two favorite times of the lunar month, is that right after a new moon you do get energy to start to get things done, and energy returns to the body, and it's always nice to be in that initial stage, that first week, those first 4 or 5 days after a new moon, when you have a certain amount of vitality and clarity and feel like you can really take things on and get them done. The last video I did was about Mars entering Scorpio. This video is about the sign of Sagittarius, and the next video I'm going to do is going to be about Capricorn. Scorpio, Sagittarius, and Capricorn, one sign after the other, and there's an awful lot of planetary activity in these three signs. And really, the drama or the unusual narratives are playing out in the signs of Scorpio and soon in the sign of Capricorn. Indeed, the sign of Capricorn simply cannot be ignored for the first 6 months of next year. And I'm going to talk about that more tomorrow or day after when I do the Venus and Capricorn video. But I wanted to do these videos in succession, and indeed, you can look at these videos one after the other to get a sense of the time. So the Mars and Scorpio video, I'll place a link to that at the end of this one once I'm done processing it. Then this one about the new moon in Sagittarius, and the next one I'll do about Venus and Capricorn. Typically, when it comes to new moons occur when the sun is in a certain part of the chart, and the sun and the planet Mercury typically travel pretty close together. The sun came into Sagittarius on the 22nd, we had a new moon on the 26th, Mercury will come into Sagittarius on December the 9th. Fair enough. The planet Venus also tends to be relatively close to the sun, and occasionally Mars will be close to the sun. So certainly in Scorpio we had quick succession of these planets, with Mercury being retrograde there, with a very confined and a complex narrative, but a narrative nonetheless. And in the sign of Capricorn, the narrative we will delve into. It's a shit show, and we will dissect that more tomorrow. In Sagittarius, it's not unusual for the Sun and Venus and Mercury and sometimes Mars to be following close behind. So planets are going to be in Sagittarius for an awfully long time. This fall is being called Scorpio season, and really at the end of the day, planets in Scorpio have lasted for about 3 months, from October the 3rd to January the 3rd. In Sagittarius, the planets last for longer. Venus was the first planet to enter Sagittarius on November the 1st, and Mars is going to be the last to leave sometime in the middle of February. So that's over a 3-month time span, but the narrative is not necessarily that complex. It builds on each other. We had Venus here till the 25th of November. Venus is now in Capricorn, hence my next video. We had the Sun come in here on November the 22nd. We have new moon on the 26th, the day after Venus left. We have Mercury coming here on December the 9th, and Mars doesn't come in here till January the 3rd. So the planets are going to move through Sagittarius one after the other, energizing a certain narrative in Sagittarius. But the narrative in Sagittarius is welcome relief, a balm, and supportive to the narratives in Scorpio and Capricorn. Last video I did, Mars in Scorpio, talked about the fact that Mars, the owner of Scorpio, is in Scorpio right now. And as I have mentioned in a number of previous videos, the sign of Scorpio is about our enmeshed relationships, close relationships, sometimes marriage or intimate relationships, more than just dating, if we're looking at the romantic side of things, business partnerships, sometimes family. So anyone with whom the relationship is close, enmeshed emotionally, has roots and entanglements, and often then can also have a financial component to it. So as I've mentioned in the last video, I'm not going to do a rehash, but there's a reason why I'm bringing up scorpionic tendencies. In my last video on Mars and Scorpio, I talked about the fact that the sign of Scorpio, at its most evolved, can see the other party, because it's about relationships, with an almost Tolstoyan sense of awareness and perception and insight. Perception and insight, very scorpionic words, especially perception. Perceptively see where the other party might be emotionally. Scorpio is a water sign dealing with emotions. And that gives us the ability in this particular sign, even if we are clashing with someone, to have perhaps a greater sense of insight and perceptiveness with regard to where they're at and where they're coming from and what is really going on in these enmeshments. When it comes to Scorpio season, which had its own complex narrative, which I will not repeat here, but is good repeated in the Mars and Scorpio video, we've had 2 months of simmering and investigation, and now we're in a phase or a space of action. Till December the 9th, that action has something to do with communication. After that, it's pure action. In certain cases, we are either coming together with people, there's some sort of a contract or a marriage or a handshake, whether the marriage is a relation, the way we understand the word marriage on a personal basis, whether the marriage is professional. But in many cases, there's a separation too. There's the energy of divorce. Libra is often considered the sign of marriage and separation, or marriage and divorce, but I have to tell you, it's Scorpio where I actually see marriage and divorce play out. Either people coming together in a way that they will ultimately be contracted, a happy union, but things play out in scorpionic ways first, often, especially in a modern Western context where people will move in together and see how they live together and whether they're truly compatible and whether they can share finances before they get married. Not in the traditional sense, which is why Libra might be considered the sign of marriage traditionally, where people might be contracted to each other without knowing each other and have no sense of whether they're compatible or not. Today, things are done a little differently, increasingly in many parts of the world, where people will come together and be in contact more, and I was going to say rub against each other. That sounds dirty. In some cases, true. But, you know, be in close interaction, physical, mental, emotional, financial interaction before they tie the knot. This could be personal or business or in whatever way two people come together. But the energy of divorce is also preceded by the energy of people thinking about and fretting about and analyzing and being in a space of whether they need to separate and whether a relationship has become unhealthy. You're going to wonder why I'm talking so much about the sign of Scorpio. I'll get to that in a second. The bottom line is as follows. Separation can be an act of bridge building. Okay, sometimes we need to separate, and the only way to salvage a relationship or to make sure it has a future is to separate. Somewhere, if you're not coming together with people at this time, and if actions and communications are not about union, they could be about separation and disentanglement. And if you look at whatever is happening through a lens that is more evolved in scorpionic terms and tries to pay attention to where the other party is at emotionally, it could be that the act of separation is indeed an act of bridge building. And I want to leave you with that insight in the middle of everything. In the last video, I was a little concerned that with Mars in Scorpio, there was an emphasis on a certain amount of violence, argument, conflict, fighting, and some of that is inevitable with Mars in Scorpio, the defense and setting up of boundaries. But I did want to end my musings on Scorpio season with an invitation to see whether or not entanglements and disentanglements could involve an act of maturity and compassion and understanding on all of our sides, so that if there was entanglement or disentanglement, it could at least to make an effort to perceptively acknowledge and see where the other party might be at emotionally, and to see whether what forms of bridge building, coming together or separation, however ironic that sounds, could be acted upon till January the 3rd. So the sign of December, so the month of December still, if you were to say, Abhi, between Scorpio, Sagittarius, and Capricorn, what sign still is taking up our mental and emotional space? It's still the sign of Scorpio. It's still the sign of relationships. It's still the sign of coming together and separating from people after 2 months, October and November, of thinking about investigating some certain things that may even have been in play last year around this time, and now finally action is being taken. For some people, this action is vengeful. For some people, this action is purely about boundaries. And for some people, this action is about union and separation in relationships that are either healthy or unhealthy or problematic. And the question is, if it's problematic and if it's separation, can that act of separation actually be an act of bridge building and salvaging the relationship? In some of these cases, when it comes to Scorpio and intense psychological issues, therapy, abuse can be abuse, and an indefensible breaking invasiveness of boundaries can be part of the equation. And clearly in those cases, you have to determine what is the right course for you, and ideally and hopefully, if you find a professional, a therapist, a psychologist, someone like that, whoever it is that is right for you to help you and guide you through that process, that is where you need to take your guidance from. It's funny, lawyers are typically a part of Sagittarius, but for some reason with Scorpio, lawyers are coming up for me to mention as well. In some of these cases, there may be a legal component to whatever this disentangling or entangling is. Okay, where does the sign of Sagittarius fit into all this? When I did the Venus and Sagittarius video, I talked about the fact that the sign of Sagittarius is an independent sign that connects us to our truth, who we are. And it's an antidote to the sign of Scorpio. After a lot of emotional enmeshment, thinking, and pondering, the sign of Sagittarius comes along to say, all right, people, enough of that. Now, why don't we get out of all this relationship emotional bullshit? It isn't bullshit. But why don't we become a little bit more philosophical, connect with spirit, connect with what our truth is, what our goals are, and focus on those and think of ourselves as individual entities. With Venus here during Scorpio season, November 1st to November 25th, I talked about how helpful it was to have a planet not comfortable in Scorpio move to Sagittarius and allow us to think about, as we were dealing with psychological and emotional and financial enmeshments, get in touch with our own independent values. I talked about the fact that Sagittarius, along with Pisces, is a sign ruled by Jupiter. And Jupiter is a planet that puts these signs, and all of us have Sagittarius in some part of the chart. We tend to identify with one or a few signs based on our knowledge of a chart, but the bottom line is we all have access to these energies. So the sign of Sagittarius and the sign of Pisces connect us to the divine, to spirit, to God in philosophical, some would say non-practical ways, some would even say romantic ways. But it does provide us with a compass. It does provide us with a sense of truth, with a capital T. What are your goals? What are your values? Who are you? What is right for you? And I also talked about, fascinatingly, sorry about the helicopter, it is Los Angeles. And I also talked about, fascinatingly, the fact that whether you are enmeshed and however you are enmeshed with someone who has a strong Sagittarius or Pisces placement, some part of them can never really be ruled or owned. Even if you are talking about someone who has a strong Sagittarius placement, a Sagittarius sun or a Sagittarius ascendant, particularly Sagittarius sun, who is playing and happy and comfortably playing a very conventional and conservative role, there's a part of them that's still feistily independent and cannot be hemmed in, cannot be fenced in. Okay. So then we had this new moon yesterday in the sign of Sagittarius. First and foremost, it's going to bring in something. It's 28 days of Sagittarius season, if you want to call it, or mini season, 28 days of a lunar cycle in Sagittarius. So wherever Sagittarius is in your chart, or wherever, or however it is that you are to be put in touch with your own sense of truth about yourself or goals and values in the middle of all this drama, that is what is going to be played out, and that's what's going to have a certain amount of support over the next 28 days. A lot of people are talking about how this is a helpful new moon. It is. And again, looking at Sagittarius through a more romantic light. But for me, this is actually a very practical new moon. Because this new moon, the one aspect that when I look at it strikes me the most and most strongly is that this new moon is conjunct the asteroid Pallas Athena. Pallas Athena is a strategic asteroid. So what strikes me strongly is that this new moon in Sagittarius that is putting us in touch with and putting greater focus on our truth and our sense of independence and our sense of how much we want to be involved with whoever moving forward. Number one is supporting the activities in a good way, I think, that are going on in Scorpio as we ponder our financial and emotional enmeshments. We need to have a compass. We need to know what we like and what we don't like and what we want to put up with and what we don't want to put up with. And this is happening for everybody, I strongly believe. When it is conjunct Pallas Athena, the normally romantic and expansive foreign travel, spirituality, higher education, the normally expansive side of Sagittarius is present because the new moon is inside Sagittarius, but is heavily tempered, in my opinion, by the need and access to strategic maneuverings that will be helpful and necessary as we take action, either through communication or through action, whatever that is or that means, in these enmeshments that we have been dealing with in what is being called the fall of Scorpio, or Scorpio season, since October the 3rd. So it's not that the sign of Sagittarius and where Sagittarius is in your chart is not going to have its own normal attention and 28-day lunar cycle, and then Mercury will come in here on December the 9th, and Mars will come in here on January the 3rd of next year, and will have its share of activity and action. It will. But somewhere, insofar as we're in the middle of a complex narrative that involves 3 consecutive signs, and I'm going to talk about Capricorn in my next video, there's something about this particular new moon that is conventionally being heralded as a very normal and a sane new moon and a kind of a philosophical new moon. I, however, see in it an extraordinarily practical and strategic element and a necessarily supportively practical and strategic element where, as we consider coming together with people or separating for people, putting up our boundaries, and I've already said in this video, ideally, if we can access it with a sense of compassion and perception and incisiveness in terms of looking at other people and their motivations through a lens of holistically trying to see who they are and where they're coming from, that does not mean that you have to back down in any way. It just means that with all the Sagittarius activity cooperating with Scorpio activity, I believe, you can be in touch with your own values and what you want to put up with and where these relationships need to go. This new moon, insofar as she is charged up with Pallas Athena, gives us the access and the ability and invitation to play chess. Playing chess could, in some cases, involve and invite strategic battles and strategic warfare, where parties are not communicating or cooperating with regard to either coming together or separating. So if one party wants to separate but the other party does not, then the chess playing is going to necessarily require an element of battle and warfare. For those places where parties are mutually trying to determine whether they're coming together or separate, or try to get some place of bridge building, or try to get some place of mutual, peaceful, and respectful coexistence where there may not have been some for at least 12 or 13 months at this point in time, it could be that the chess playing is in the service of surrendering. Surrender is not the right word because it can put people's back up and it can make people feel like they're somehow losing in the scenario. But what I mean by surrender is if someone is being extremely accusatory, if someone is, one way to play chess could be to open the door and say, come on, come in, take a look. There's nothing here. I've been telling you there's nothing here. Come and take a look. There's nothing here. Sometimes chess playing could mean that if there are certain steps that need to be taken, you are actively communicating something, but thinking that certain things need to be done strategically behind someone's back. Sometimes the chess playing, to some extent, with the aim of maintaining and keeping one's own peace of mind and staying in integrity and connection with one's own sense of values and truth, but at the same time also trying to get things to a place where there can be some mutual respect and peaceful coexistence, even if people are separating or coming together, sort of in terms of enmeshments. You're going to have to determine what this strategy or strategic chess playing is going to look like. It often involves playing one's cards close to the chest. It necessarily involves, with all this activity, being clear about what you really want out of the situation. Are you done? Or are you exploring some sort of a handshake? But the invitation and the path forward has, I don't want to use the word maneuvering, because it's not about sleight of hand. It's not about being out of integrity. It's not about lying unless you have to, because you're dealing with a particularly aggressive or stubborn or uncooperative party. As I said, in those cases, Pallas Athena is asking you to be pretty strategic and pretty careful. With Pallas Athena, nothing is off limits. With Pallas Athena, all is fair in love and war. When the relationship is in truly dire straits and you need to free yourself. With Pallas Athena, nothing is off the table in terms of surreptitious, behind-the-scenes strategic maneuverings, ways to win. But with Pallas Athena also, if the end result or the desired result is more constructive and more productive and more long-lasting, and the attempt is, I'm going to continue to use this phrase, it keeps coming up, peaceful and respectful coexistence. We're not going to be where we were before. I do not want to remain married or tied to you in some way, but let's explore whether we can have some sort of a handshake and whether the relationship can have some sort of workability moving forward, separation being an act of bridge building. There, the chess playing is constructive, self-protective, hidden, the cards are close to the chest, you're still watching the other party, but there's a kind of a chess playing through this maneuvering. It isn't lying necessarily, it might be hiding something, it isn't false, it isn't meant to be hurtful, because those things inevitably, God lives in the truth and we are in the season of truth. So if the intention is not clean, it will come to light, it will crumble, it will affect the relationship for the worse. It will. At this time, with whatever's playing out and with Mercury coming into Sagittarius on December the 9th, it's not going to be pretty. But if the intention is we're not getting along, I don't want to be in this anymore in this way, I want to separate, the question with the chess playing that you're invited to do for the next 28 days, but it's active now. The new moon was yesterday. All of this is active now. The invitation is to see what this chess playing needs to look like to achieve some sort of a constructive new place in those relationships where the enmeshments or the nature of the enmeshments need to evolve. Okay. It's a steadier, more practical new moon than is being advertised. And a far more strategic and grounded and mentally attuned. It's a far sharper, far more present new moon than is being thought of. Okay, let me start to wrap this up. You're welcome to share this video if you found it useful. You can share it wherever you like. Feel free to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Like the video, comment on it if you like. I'm going to do my next video on Venus in Capricorn tomorrow or day after. You're welcome to use my email address if you want me to make an easy to read chart for you that tells you which signs are in which houses, or if you're looking for a reading, you can inquire about rates using that email address. And if you do subscribe to the YouTube channel, click on the bell icon next to the subscribe button so you know when it is that I'm doing my next video. I hope you found this video useful. Happy new moon. Enjoy the influx of energy and new things around Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving for people who are celebrating or taking time off. And yeah, just enjoy the next 3 or 4 days and the relative peace and balance it brings. But remember that there's a narrative here, and the Sagittarius activity is supporting the Scorpionic activity, and the invitation is to continue to work on close relationships and either coming together or separating from them, but in ways that are practical and calculated, ideally trying to move to a place of peaceful coexistence, whether it is an act of unity or separation. That's where I'm going to leave it. Thank you. Bye.